All right, everyone. It is a few minutes after the hour. I appreciate everyone joining us tonight. Tonight, we are going to be walking through the 7-minute myth, why patients aren't waiting and what to do about it. Our presenter tonight is Josh Wagner, the Chief Revenue Officer of one of the more exciting companies in dentistry today, the AI-based company PeerLogic. And I've got a lot of experience with phones, with AI, and with PeerLogic. This is a tool that all of us should be using today, but that is not the point of this presentation. The point of this presentation is to teach you guys the latest strategies that we need to understand about patient behavior on the phones and what we can do about it and how much our mistakes are costing us that you may not even be aware of. So sit back. Also, a couple housekeeping things. You may have some questions, which is great. Please go ahead and type the questions into the chat if you can, and we will get to your questions throughout the presentation. If not, we'll get them at the end. And if for whatever reason we can't get to your question, feel free to email us. We posted in the chat right now the email address, and we'll make sure we get you an answer after this presentation, if that's appropriate. All right, so I will go ahead and turn it over now to Josh Wagner. Josh, thank you for joining us. It's all yours.
Hey, Scott, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me. And everybody, welcome. Good evening. So yeah, like we talked about, we're going to talk about the 7-minute myth, why patients aren't waiting and what we should be doing about it. So let's do a quick run through of what we're going to talk through today and how we're going to run through this. So there's a lot of things we're going to cover. First is patients aren't willing to wait. We're going to talk a little bit about human nature, how people are doing in their lives, probably pretty standard for what's happening in your lives. What is the data telling us about patient behavior? I think we all make a lot of assumptions about people and their behaviors, and the data might tell a slightly different story than what you're used to. We'll run through some actionable things that we can do to reduce missed calls and improve front desk performance. A little snack that you can take with you into this is 80% of revenue in a dental office is still run through the phone. So the phone is an important piece of your practice, something that we're going to want to really drill into. And then just talk about some training and tools and things that we can do here. So moving forward, me and Scott don't need to go any further into that. And all right, on our agenda, we talked a little bit about these things, the myth busting. What are some of the myths that we talk about? What's the data telling us? The cost. Scott talked a little bit about the back and napkin math you can do to realize what some of these little things might be costing your practice, transforming the front desk, and some of the tools and resources. Q&A, we can leave it for the end, but please drop them in the chat. Like Scott said, we can try to answer them live as we go. All right, so myth, big myth number one. The average hold time, I've heard this floating around the dental sphere, is 90 seconds for a dental practice. Now, let's think about this a little bit. It says the reality is that 13% of patients will stay on hold for 2 minutes. This is industry average across call analytics platforms, benchmarking data from dental practices. And over half of patients will never call back after hanging up. And this is also from dental call center data. So think about a minute and a half, 90 seconds. What's happening in that 90 seconds and who's oftentimes calling your office? I think about my household, right? I've got 3 kids and my wife typically is handling a lot of the logistics around scheduling appointments, especially when it comes to things like dentistry. She is oftentimes juggling a dozen or so things at a time. And if she calls a practice, she gets put on hold. During that time, my guess is she's going to get 10 to 15 texts. I've sat next to her, tried to have a conversation with her while texts are flying in, and the amount of texts that fly in a minute and a half is unfathomable. Scott, I remember you talking about your wife at the last seminar I was in. I'm sure this is a similar situation you found yourself in.
Well, yeah. And of course, at home, I've got 5 kids, and every 15 to 30 seconds, I hear mama, 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 mama. Everyone's pulling on her. But even then, like, even if a patient stays on hold, you know, how does that hold time impact their perception of the experience of the practice? And then will they schedule, right? So there's got to be this relationship between, you know, putting people on hold versus not, and people scheduling more often versus not. And, it's interesting in our seminar, we go and cold call practices in the
I've heard
seminar.
that.
I get my cell phone, I put it on speaker, and we literally are calling local practices. And I'd say at least half the time, they're either not answering or I'm immediately put on hold. And that hold time can go on for what seems like forever. And, of course, at some point, I just abandoned the call. So less than 90 seconds. All right. It's interesting too, because you say 50 to 70% of patients never call back after hanging up. I think a lot of physicians are assuming when patients call and they're not able to answer, that patients will just call them back.
Right.
In dentistry, what I've seen, I used to have one of the largest call centers in dentistry before I sold it. We would track that. Did patients call back? We had technology that would catch a missed call, look at the number, and track to see if they call back. Hardly ever did they call back. We're just one practice on a list of multiple practices.
You move on, right? The next one. Yeah. Whoever's going to pick up first.
Yeah. But what's scary about this is dentists, we don't know. We don't know what's happening. We don't know how long are they on hold today. We don't know how many patients you might be losing. And if any of us have had to be on hold or try to call physicians that didn't answer, think of the times, if you're listening to this right now, think of the times you decided to call someone else. And you probably thought to yourself, that physician will never know that you could have been their patient, but they just mishandled the call.
Yeah. And the other thing that stands out to me is when you're waiting, your patience gets thinner and thinner as you go, right? So say you do wait the full 90 seconds and then someone picks up. Now you're expecting perfection, right? And at the end of the day, is the front office going to be perfect every time? We want them to be, but is that the reality?
Yeah, I agree. If I'm put on hold, I'm actually looking for more problems when they come back.
That's right.
I'm like, is this, do they not know what they're doing?
Yeah. So, I think if we take a deeper dive into the data, we're lucky to have over 1 billion minutes of call data in our model that we can look into, and we can look at the reality of what some of these things say, right? So the average time to answer in dental practice is 2.5 minutes. That's over 90 seconds. That's a problem. Call abandonment spikes at 60 seconds. So people's patience, is starting to really, really, really wear thin within a minute. And then the one that really stands out to me, and we can run some back of the napkin math, and it's actually on the next slide, which is 30% of calls in busy practices go unanswered.
Well, let's dive into this slide a little deeper. So I think that a lot of dentists, especially those that have been to our events, they've been taught over the last few years about calls, about missed call rates. And for a lot of people, it may not be new. But what might be new is this call abandonment. So this is a very interesting thing. And we saw this as well in my call center. Your team might even answer a call and say, thank you for calling ABC Dental. Can you please hold? And then the patient will say, okay, and they'll hold. And if your team member doesn't go back soon enough, that patient will hang up. And it will never show up as a missed call. That will never show up as a missed call.
That's a great
But
point.
what it is it's an abandoned call, right? And so, even some of your practices have call tracking software on your marketing materials and your phone numbers. And you might be, or even looking in your VoIP call phone system, and you might be looking at kind of the kind of generic missed call rate that they're showing you in a report. That missed call rate is not accurate because it is ignoring the call abandonment. And the call abandonment can be a significant portion of calls coming to your practice. Did I say that correctly?
No, you're 100% right. And I think the abandonment is a great thing to drill into, because the most basic analytics platforms, like you mentioned, a VoIP provider, right? You're going to get calls answered, calls missed. I mean, that's kind of the bread and butter of what you're going to get out of your voice analytics platform. And it's not telling you anything about hold time. It's not telling you anything about abandonment. Do you pick up? Do you put them on hold? So I think those are really important metrics that you should start thinking about at the very least in your practice, as how do we handle an inbound call incoming? What are we going to do with it? And we're going to talk about some of those things as we keep moving here. So let's talk about the cost of that. And this is just the missed call, right? This doesn't even take into account what Scott was talking about in terms of abandonment. But let's say, depending on the type of practice that you run and the specialty, I've heard the average new patient coming in the door is worth anywhere from $250 for maybe a new patient exam and a cleaning to $1,200 for an evaluation for maybe an all-on-4 or something like that.
Yeah, I've actually got some of that data. A typical new patient first year value is closer to 1,200.
Okay.
A recall patient that has come back or been reactivated, 1 year value is right under 800. Okay. So, and sometimes we're missing those calls. We're making calls out to reactivate patients or sending emails or texts, and they finally say, okay. And then they call to come back to us and we miss that call. So I'd say that, you're being very conservative.
That's what I was going to say.
You're underestimating to be really reasonable, which is great.
Yeah.
But man, that's a ton of money.
Dude, that adds up so fast, right? Like you miss 5 calls a day, and we already saw that on average 30% are being missed. So, and because Scott, in a busy practice, or let's say a moderate practice, how many calls inbound are they getting a day?
Well, we can kind of do some backwards math. So let's say a practice gets 70 new patients a month.
Right.
Okay. New patient calls have approximately a 42% conversion rate. So 70 new patients came from 166 calls.
Yeah, right.
But we're missing about a third of our calls. So a practice is typically getting around 250 calls a month from new patient prospects. That doesn't even include all the rest. 250 calls a month from new patients. We end up with 70, could have had 250.
Yeah, and our data backs that up actually, where it says that about a third of the calls that come inbound are new patient inquiries, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you miss 5 a day at these conservative numbers. Your potential loss of $25K to $120 a month in revenue, and even if we're just talking new patients, right? There are obviously existing patients that are coming back for procedures and things like that, but I mean, I don't know. That sounds like if you're running a decent practice, the margin on that is, I think I remember from your last seminar that you're looking to be running at well, you didn't talk in EBITDA, you talked in gross margin, right? So you were talking at 35% being healthy, 50%, 35% take home type of thing?
Yeah, well, okay. So if we go down that path, our practices that we coach, we don't label them as healthy unless their overhead is less than 50%.
Right.
So their take-home pay is more than 50%.
Gotcha.
And in the group practices where the owners don't work, they don't pick up a handpiece.
Right.
We don't label them as acceptable until they're around the 20% EBITDA margin.
Gotcha.
But here's the reality though. A practice today, and a regular practice that's missing some calls, and they got some abandoned calls, and they fumble some calls they do answer, right? That practice has already paid their overhead with the patients they got. They've already paid the rent. They've already paid the loan. They've already paid the utilities. They paid for the staff, and they've got some openings in their schedule. If they could add a few more patients to that schedule, it's a lot more than 50% take home on those extra patients, right? There's very little cost to those extra patients.
Right.
So the really profitable practices aren't necessarily huge practices. The $1 million take home pay practices aren't necessarily doing big cases. What they are doing is fixing their phones, fixing their diagnosis, and fixing their case acceptance so that it doesn't take a lot of patients to get a really good number. And they're also, of course, not spending too much money.
Yeah.
And so, and when I look at expenses, there's frivolous expenses and there's smart expenses when it comes to the business side. Investing in perfecting phones or perfecting diagnosis or perfecting case acceptance. Those are the 3 big levers that drive production.
Yeah.
Phones, diagnosis, and case acceptance. Investing in anything that turns that knob the right way has a dramatic return on investment.
Yeah. So you could argue that this, 25 to 120K is that gravy, right? That super high margin stuff that's just taking your practice and your take home to the next level.
Yeah. And imagine you do full arch cases and you miss 1/3 of those calls.
Oh, geez. I don't know if I want to do that.
Or you're trying to do more aligner cases.
Right.
And you're missing a third of those calls, and you're spending a fortune on Google ads. Yeah, and you don't know it because all of our people look busy, and we're busy. And it looks like they're we don't know it without data. We need truth. Otherwise, we just blindly just move forward and we think we just need to spend more on marketing. So it's so important to have the vitals of the practice, the blood pressure, the pulse, right? And answered versus missed calls and converted calls. Those two numbers are part of the vitals. We have to have those numbers to understand if we're healthy or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I like where you're taking us, and that's where we're actually heading next. And I do want to touch more on that idea of busy and the human element of how all of this works as we get moving here. So let's talk a little bit about the transformation of the front office. And I think based on talking to people, they think it's this big, massive lift that just can't be overcome because, let's face it, people are complicated, right? And I've kind of heard two ends of the spectrum, and maybe you can help me validate this when it comes to front office folks. You've got two people, right? You've got the person that's been there, the lifer, 40 years, they're set in their ways. They've been doing it this way forever. And this is how I operate. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But the reality is it probably is broke, and it's really hard to fix because they're stubborn and this is the way they've always done it. And then the other side of that spectrum is you're churning a young person every, 3 to 6 weeks because it's just too much. Is that a fairly accurate statement for what we're seeing in the front office?
Yeah, there's better and worse of both of those, but we've got people that have been in dentistry for a while. We got people that haven't. Yeah. And it's getting harder and harder to find people that have been in dentistry for a while. It's getting harder to keep them. And the ones that have been in dentistry for a while, there's some good apples and bad apples, but almost all of them apples think that the way they've been doing it's the right way.
The right way.
But sometimes we have to put aside the way we've always done it that's gotten us some decent results to do it a new way that gets us better results. And that's hard because those veterans are proud of how they have been doing things. They have muscle memory on what to say on the phone and how to route calls and how to do insurance verification, for example. They're not even thinking that 80% of insurance verification should have been automated by now. They're still calling insurance companies, for example. So they think that's the right way. And it was, and it's still okay, but it's not the best way today. Those new people, their lack of experience, their lack of professionalism, of commitment, of just understanding patients in the industry and software is a whole nother struggle. So we're just trying to get them to learn how to do it. Whereas the veterans, we're trying to get them to upgrade to today's standards. And both of those can feel daunting, which is why AI and technology can be a great ingredient to kind of moving forward to the next phase of success.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the perfect setup there, Scott. So these are the three things that we really want to drill into the meat of the content here. We want to train people with purpose. We want to track what matters. And then we want to use smart automation or artificial intelligence. And let's take a little bit of dive into what each of those things means. When I think about training with purpose, that can't be done without setting a standard, right? And that makes 1 and 2 very closely aligned to one another. But how do we know what good looks like? Maybe you have the lifer who is phenomenal, but they're on their way out and you need to start bringing new people in to bridge that gap between their retirement and the new guard coming in. Well, how do you just get that? It's really hard to offload that information. That's where things like call recording come into place, where you can record, score, and coach against what's happening in that environment. So setting a standard, however that standard is set, that's just one idea, is a great way to even get things off the bench of what's going to happen. So you want to measure and incentivize the behavior that you want. And I've always seen this, I've seen it in a lot of different industries, and I know, not everything is dental, but incentivization around the behavior you want can be a really powerful tool. And especially for front office staff, incentivizing them to do the things that you want to do and giving them some variable on top of their base can be a very highly motivating thing to keep them engaged with the practice and doing the things that you want them to do. And obviously it needs to fit into the model that Scott mentioned about 50% and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's reasonable, right? Have you seen any sort of variable compensation levers with front office staff, Scott?
Yeah, it's actually something I developed about 15 years ago that is
Oh,
still pretty unusual today. We teach kind of a simple bonus system in our kind of intense business training events. And then we teach a more mature version of that involves what you're saying. So without getting into bonus systems too deep, let's just assume an office has a bonus system. Okay? How can we tie the bonus system to specific performance numbers for the front office staff? There's two ways that I've seen work successfully. It could be, if we answer enough calls, then you, the receptionist, are eligible for the office bonus. So we have an office bonus, but not everyone will get it because if they didn't hit their own personal number, they weren't eligible that week.
Got it.
Okay, so that's one way. So that's complicated because you're trying to track and get the whole office to hit some office goal, but you're also, the individual person has their own individual goal that qualifies them for the office bonus. It works incredibly well though. Okay. Yep. The other way of handling it is that you may or may not have an office bonus, but you do have a specific KPI bonus, a metric bonus, and a receptionist metric might be answered call rate or might be conversion rate. A treatment coordinator's metric might be case acceptance percentage for the week. A hygienist might be, hitting a certain production average per day for that week. And so you assign a number to that job role. And if we hit that number, they get extra pay because they brought extra value. And so if you were to have something like Pure Logic, very quickly, what was our answered call rate? What was our conversion rate? Conversion rate is almost impossible to get without AI. Right. Someone or something or some AI has to listen to all the calls to understand what was said. Did the patient convert to an appointment or not? Were they trying to convert, and then did they convert? So back to what you said, you could easily layer in Pure Logic into the practice very quickly and have, as a special project for this month, phones training, and we are going to track it through Pure Logic, and we are going to have this added benefit, this pay, this bonus for those people specifically that have implemented and achieved a great conversion rate. That is a very straightforward way of doing it. Of course, you got to do the work to put it in place, but it definitely changes behavior.
Yeah, I love it. And as you're seeing here, the lines are being blurred between point 1 and point 2. You can't do one without tracking what matters. And there's a couple of ways to do that, right? There are industry standard benchmarks for things like missed call rates and conversion rates and recall rates and all of those sorts of things. You can get them through, Dentistry Now or whatever. We have benchmarks that we collect within our system as well. But just because an industry standard or there's an industry benchmark for something doesn't mean that it's the right way. Benchmarks are taking averages across hundreds, if not thousands of practice data and saying the highest performers are doing this. Great. I still believe if you get things in place, it's always best to set your own standard. And that standard really needs to be molded around the best possible customer experience. And that's how I feel like setting a benchmark and setting a standard should really be done. It's not bad to start with industry benchmarks, but work your way into the gold standard for your practice that revolves around the customer and customer centricity.
As I hear you say this, there's a couple different ingredients here to end up with a really high-performing team on the phones. One ingredient says, we need to know what our numbers are. Are we already high-performing or not? How have we done in the past to today? Are we getting worse? Are we getting better? So we need to know the numbers. And that's where something like Pure Logic is mandatory. Okay. We need to know, how are we doing? The second kind of component to this is, okay, what is the right thing to say so we convert more patients? And what's the right setup of our system so that we answer more calls, right? Because those are the two big numbers. Did we answer and did we convert? And that is best practices. So we need to understand, okay, what are the right words and how am I going to route calls? How am I going to use automation, for example, if I do miss a call to get them to schedule anyway, even though I missed the call, things like that. Okay. That's the second ingredient. What's the right way? The third ingredient is, okay, now I need to know, how are we doing it? I know the right way. I know best practices and I can measure it all, but what are we saying? And if I train them to say something different, is it going to stick? And that is the auditing portion. But the auditing portion is the part that's so difficult for dental practices, because no one wants to go log into a phone system and try to find some recorded calls somewhere, and they don't know which calls are good or bad and what the patient's talking about. And then listen and listen and listen and try to find the right call to audit, and then go and train people, or like, it just isn't realistic. It's possible, but it's not realistic. And that's why, back to AI and why I invite you into my seminar, that is why Pure Logic is again needed. Because Pure Logic is listening to every call, transcribing every call, categorizing every call, showing us which calls failed and which succeeded. And if they failed, why and how much did we lose? And so it's so fast to go find the calls that we need to listen to for training purposes. If you could imagine, let's forget the owner of the practice. It's so hard to get an owner to do this stuff. They're so busy cutting teeth. It's so hard. They're already stretched thin. Let's say we have an office manager, and we tell the office manager, one of your roles is that you do a weekly phones audit, and you find a great call and a terrible call. And you go to the team members and say, here's the call of shame. Here's the call of fame. And it's your job to make sure we hit these two numbers correctly: answered calls and converted. Well, bam, as long as you got something like Pure Logic, that can be implemented, and that actually moves the needle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I think, if we think about number 3 here, which is everything that you're touching on, right? There's a couple of ways I think about AI, and I always like to start in the macro. So it's really interesting when you talked about workflow and automation efficiency. So the world of SaaS in the 2000s to the 2015s, right? Like creating workflows and automation tools. The biggest industries that were laggards in that were healthcare and legal. They just didn't adopt. It wasn't a needle mover for them, right? Do I really need to make my people incrementally more efficient? I don't need to spend that money, right? Now let's fast forward to today and the boom of AI. The two biggest adopters of AI by a mile are healthcare and legal. And the reason behind that is it's pure productivity. It's giving you more juice for less money and sometimes less people. So to me, I don't want to replace people. I want to make people the most efficient version of themselves as possible, so that because I think humanity is ultimately going to win, right? Like when someone walks into your practice, they're going to talk to a person. The data still shows that if someone calls and someone picks up the phone, they expect to talk to a human being, not a robot or an AI agent. It's going to happen, but they would love to talk to a human being. So the goal with AI should be, let's take out all of the things that are a burden to the person that can be automated, the tasks, the listening to a voicemail, the filling what did you say, an insurance verification, all of those things that can be automated by AI should be, so that your people can be the most human versions of themselves possible. And when someone walks through that door, they are just delighted because nothing else is burdening them. It's all being taken off by AI, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things when we look at use smart automation that we're really talking about in the modern age, right? Like, what can AI do for you? In our world, Scott laid it out. There are a number of things, to the point of analyzing a voicemail, building you a task list that says, this is a prescription refill, this is an insurance verification, this is this, this is this. Oh, by the way, we already pick up that new patient booking. We're going to cover that for you, right? That missed call. So now it's automating those things and creating that user experience in meeting the patient where they are in the things that they're accepting of for AI to handle for them. But when it comes to that human interaction, the face-to-face needs to be top notch.
Well, the way I kind of look at it is, imagine I'm an office manager. If I was at home, I'd say, hey, Alexa, play me, whatever, this song, or hey, Siri, answer this question for me, right? Now I go into dental practice and I'm the office manager. I say, hey, AI, hey, PeerLogic, hey, AI, when a patient calls and we miss the call, text them immediately with a link to schedule.
That's right.
Hey, AI, show me all the calls that we messed up. Hey, AI, how many did we miss? How is our conversion? How much money did we miss? Hey, AI, whenever we don't convert a new patient that needed a high dollar procedure, email me, the office manager, immediately so that I know to call the patient, even though they didn't schedule. If I call them, they might schedule. So in other words, it's like I'm sitting behind this cockpit of the dental practice, and now I get this AI tool that just pulls all the calls for me, tells me how we're doing, routes calls the way I want, tees them up so that I'm able to perform at a higher level.
That's right.
And if we were talking about performing other things at a higher level in a dental office, like, are we restocking the coffee bar better? Are we changing light bulbs better? Not that big of a deal, not that impactful. But we're talking about, am I converting more people into my schedule? That's one of the biggest deals. So if we're going to optimize things, calls, phones should be in the top part of this list. And that is what's such a huge opportunity. Honestly, I'm so tempted to just go out on a shopping spree again and just start buying practices again and just freaking fix the phone, sit back a year and then flip that practice. I mean, because the practices grow pretty steadily when you just get incremental increases in success on the phones. So assuming, of course, there's room in the schedule to put all these extra patients, right? Assuming we fix that problem too. So that's really how I look at this. Now, I mentioned some things you didn't mention, so I'm gonna turn it back over to you, but I mentioned things like, hey, if we miss a new patient call, can you immediately text them a link to schedule? Or, hey, if we did answer the call, but we screwed it up and it was worth a lot of money, they asked about Invisalign, or they asked about full arch and they didn't schedule, send that call to me so I can call them back. Are those things possible, or could you talk about that?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about a little bit. So, a little bit of shameless promotion here to a certain extent, right? Even one better than texting them a missed call, a booking appointment link. So we've gotten to the point where our AI agent, Amy, can actually engage in a full-on text conversation with the patient, triggered by that missed call, and integrate it into your practice management system to the point where they can book according to your booking rules, right? So if you say, oh, we only do hygiene from here to here, we only do cleanings and new evals here to here, we block off crowns and whatnot from here to here, all of that stuff is configured into the agent's rules, and they can get into full dialogues to answering questions about new patient, existing patient. They can book into your calendar. They can give you office hours. They can, a whole host of things that you might build into a Q&A. That agent is just pulling in that data and using it to have a conversation in a human-like way. And what's interesting, going back to my wife booking appointments for me and my kids, she wants everything tracked. The text message is the modality that she prefers. And interestingly enough, the data that we found, because there's a lot of AI happening within the world and all across healthcare, dental not excluded from that, is, I mentioned this before, people expect a human being to pick up the phone and the phone is answered. If a robot picks up the phone, they get a little pissed off and frustrated with that experience. However, on the back end of the experience, when it goes to voicemail, people have been talking to tape machines, robots, whatever, for 40 years now, leaving a voicemail. So they're accepting of that part of the experience at the end of the cycle. So now when you go to voicemail, if that gets picked up by text, which seems to be a very high converting modality for a lot of people, possibly voice, possibly web chat agent, we have the ability to meet them where they are, cross modalities, to get that patient booked and on your calendar and converted, which is the most important thing. The other piece of that.
Let me say that in more simple terms if we can. Patient calls and we miss the call.
Correct.
Immediately that patient gets a text saying, hey, sorry I missed your call. How can I help? I'm Amy from ABC Dental. How can I help you?
That's right.
And now the patient starts texting back, hey, are you guys open on Fridays? Amy says, yes, we are. And you guys do wisdom teeth? Yes, we do. And Amy can ultimately have this two-way conversation leading the patient into scheduling, even
100%.
though we missed the call. Did I say that correctly?
That is 100% correct.
And that's all custom to that practice. The practice is schedule, the practice is information, right?
That's correct. Yep.
Yep. And so, 10, 15 years ago, in order to fix this missed call problem, we had to roll calls over to a call center. We had to pay $7 a call or $10 a call. And the call center didn't always get our personal information correct. They didn't always know how to schedule. And there's a lot of friction there. There's a lot of difficulty. Or we just missed the call. Or we have to pay someone to stay late. Or they gotta hold a cell phone and we hope that they answer. And they got to remote into the software to try to figure out how to schedule. There's a lot of difficulty there. Like the old way of hailing a cab. There's a lot of difficulty there, right? But right now, like, this isn't replacing answering a call, but it sure is fixing missing a call. Did I say that correctly?
You did. And, I don't want to leave out the point you made earlier about training, right? So let's say we do answer the phone, right? The AI is listening to that call, recording, transcribing, and summarizing to the point where if there is a missed opportunity, someone mentioned Invisalign and we didn't get a Invisalign consult booked, that turns into an opportunity alert immediately that's sent to the person on the call, the owner, whoever needs to be alerted via email, text message, whatever modality you choose, to make sure that, one, we call that patient back right away and say, hey, listen, I forgot to talk to you about your Invisalign consult. You brought that up. That's my fault. I apologize for that. One. Two is that coaching and training opportunity to say, hey, let's take a listen to this call. Where did we miss that? How did we deviate from the standards that we set? Going back to step one, we need to create a standard and have a consistent coaching and training methodology. And we don't have the time to sift through 1,000 calls that might have happened in a month's time. We're going to get served up with those important high value calls and understand where we did well and where we didn't. And we can take the best of the best and use those as training opportunities for other folks that we might be bringing into the practice.
Well, it's also like peace of mind as a CEO of a dental practice. Think about this. I get so many reports I might look at. I got so many people pulling on me as an owner of a dental practice. I'm tired from cutting teeth and, it's hard. It's hard. But you know what I might want? If we talk to a patient that asked about a procedure that costs more than $4,000, a new patient, and they didn't schedule it, I might want you to email me that call.
Yes.
And you know what? Could I get a report every week or every month that just lets me know, are we answering and are we converting? And of course, I still want the whole text conversation thing happening and my office manager plugged in and all that stuff too. But me as a CEO, my life sure would be better if you sent me some of those really expensive failed calls whenever they happen, and you gave me my two core numbers so I at least know what's going on. That's so valuable to me as a CEO, because without AI, how am I going to get that? How is anyone, for example, on this webinar going to know or going to hear these Invisalign or implant or full arch calls where the patient didn't schedule? How is anyone on this call going to understand, are we getting worse or better with conversion? Did the new receptionist I hire, is she bombing my practice on the phone or not? We're not going to know. So if anything, this type of technology gets me in the know in a way that gives me peace of mind. It doesn't take a bunch of my work and my time. If anything, even if I'm not using everything at full disposal here, or what I have access to, just that is so freaking valuable. Everyone should have that. Everyone that owns a practice
can't manage what you can't measure.
Needs to have it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think there's, some benefit here. Just the domain expertise is important, right? We've got over 1 billion minutes of call data in the dental space, right? So those AI models are trained for dental. And there is something there to that, right? When you talk about benchmarking, what does good look like? How does a practice go? Scoring and coaching. And these are one of the things, with you, Scott, your methodology, right? how do we score and train against that, specifically leveraging the AI? Those are the things that become really, really important, because you make these investments in your practice, and we want to have a way to track and measure them. And if we can say, oh, well, the Scott Leune methodology, what do you call it? What was the one on the phone? What is the thing you call it? I can't even remember. Whatever.
You're talking about how the words we use to answer calls and stuff. We take control of the call. We start asking all the questions ourselves.
Yeah, and you start hammering people in the audience,
Yep.
and you reverse on them and all that kind of stuff. Like,
yeah, and it's actually really effective. Really effective.
It is. I love it. Right. Like when you were doing that section, is one of my favorite parts of the whole thing. Right. Because it's just tapping into human nature and how people really respond. Well, how do we show people what that is if we can't score and grade against that model? And that's what AI allows us to do, generally speaking.
Yeah.
Well, the only thing I'll leave you with is just what this kind of looks like in real time, right? So some of the things that we talked about, and this is a 30-day snapshot from a single practice, right? Not a large DSO or anything like that, just leveraging some of the things that we talked about here. So conversion rate, you can see recovered revenue. This is one of those things where patient calls, they don't book an appointment, we go back and we recover that revenue, right? And then cold leads. So again, you're spending money on marketing dollars. You're bringing, leads in the door. How are we converting those things? So lost recurred revenue and converted previously lost opportunities are big metrics that we look at quite a bit, leveraging the technology to say, hey, this was a missed opportunity. Let's get them back on the horn and call them back. And then also that opportunity to capture revenue that may have gone from the missed call rate, things that go there. So
a lot of people watching this may not really understand the significance of some of this. So plus 8% conversion rate in 30 days. When you understand that the national average conversion rate is 42%, adding plus 8 takes it to 50%. That is like a practice that was getting 80 new patients a month, and now they're getting 100. Okay. So that is a big change, because those extra 20 new patients a month don't have a whole lot of cost associated with them. So it drives a profit up in a significant way compared to before. So that's like one example. And just in 30 days, what happens in 6 months? What happens in 12 months? Right. It's a big deal. And what I've seen with access to AI like this is that the minute you connect the team to the number, you get a dramatic increase in the number. So it's one thing to not know. That's most dentists. It's another thing to have a report. Okay, that's great. The minute we connect the team with the report, there's a jump. I've seen it all over dental practice. Yeah, like for example, hygiene. The minute you start tracking certain hygiene numbers, magically the hygienists start doing more of that. So, that you're not going to get in 30 days. But this is one of those like few things in dentistry, very few things where you can plug it in and not have to do a whole lot, and suddenly you get a result. Other things aren't like that. Increasing your case acceptance isn't an easy plug and play solution, right? This is one of them. Another one of them is sending out a text link to pay. I was just at a conference this past weekend where they showed the data. More than 30% collections increase when it's a text link to pay. That's like another example of a plug and play thing. There's a handful of these things that we have to incorporate in today's modern practice. And of course, again, that's why I invite you to my events, but this is one of those have to incorporate kind of things.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Appreciate that. So if you want to, I don't know, I didn't see any questions come in. So if there's anything that you want to cover, now would be definitely the time to do it. The QR code in the bottom left of your screen will take you to a booking link should you want to see more and kind of get a demonstration of the items that we covered today and a deeper dive into Pure Logic and our AI solutions. But yeah, open up the floor. I don't know if you saw anything, Scott.
I get, because I speak so much, I get a lot. I know a lot of questions that people sometimes have. So okay. I'm gonna proactively answer some of those questions. And if you guys think of any other ones, please type it in the chat. And then we've got a couple more slides, and then we'll wrap this up. So one question that I get a lot is, will something like Pure Logic work with my existing phone system? I've got a VoIP system, I've got marketing numbers. do I have to change my phone system? Yes or no?
No, you don't have to.
Yeah. So it's pretty simple to kind of roll right into your existing setup. And another thing to think about is patients, you market to them or they were referred to you, they call you, you might answer. If you do, we need to know, is your conversion good? We need to know if you didn't convert, how much of a loss was that? Was that an implant case? We need to know. And if something bad happens, not only do we need to know, we need to call that patient back. Okay. Then you've got the part that says, okay, we may not even answer the call. We might even answer the call. Okay, well, if we don't answer the call, well, then what? We need to know. We need to know, are we not answering calls? Or we need to know if someone specific, some specific routing, there's all kinds of setups practices have, but we need to know. And then if we don't answer that call, let's get them into a text conversation. Let's get them with AI going ahead and scheduling anyway. And let's follow up with them. Now that we know we missed their call, can we call them back? Because it's been teed up to us quickly. We can call them back quickly. Could your office manager, for example, call patients back whenever we get a missed call? It teed right up to them. Those things I've just said are like new little gears in our practice machine that we need to put in place. But when we put that new 5th gear and new 6th gear in, without extra effort, we go faster. And that is what is hard to know and see if you've never had this before. It's hard to think, I don't need more staff to answer more calls. Or I don't need more staff to get more new patients. I just need the right technology in place and the right reaction or use of that technology in my practice. So this is a process of implementation that is a really smart thing to look at. We did have one question come in. Oh, a price question. How much per month they're asking? I'm assuming they're talking about how much is Pure Logic per month. How does pricing work with Pure Logic?
Yeah, our full suite, should you require the full suite, is $699 per location per month. The Scott Leune special is $550. So there's
I had no idea. Okay.
$150 per month off. But yeah, and that depends. That I just gave you the high end, the full suite program. There's packages below that as well, but just to give you.
Okay, so the most expensive this would be on the Scott Leune special is $550 a month, or there are options to kind of have a lighter level of service. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. I'm curious what the lowest number is, the lightest possible level of service that may not include all these functions. What does that look like?
$199.
$199 a month. Yeah. At those prices, considering the problem you're solving, it just takes one patient.
Correct.
Just one patient, or shoot, one Invisalign case will cover an entire year's worth of cost.
That's right.
So it's one of those things that I think is a very smart investment. Is there a required commitment, a year or multi-year contract? How does that work?
We sign annual contracts. It's pretty standard, but there are, we expect to be a revenue driver for your practice. So I have not very frequently say, listen, give us 90 days. And if we're not paying for ourselves, then, risk-free, you can get out.
Yeah. So someone could set this up and try it for 3 months. And after 3 months, look at the data, talk to their team, talk to you guys, and decide, is it making sense for them or not?
Yep. We believe
I think that's a pretty small commitment to potentially address a really valuable area of practice management. Okay. And just for the record here, when he says Scott Leune is special, that doesn't mean that Scott Leune is getting any money. Just so everyone knows, that is not what this is. I do these webinars, a lot of webinars, to try to teach different areas of dentistry and practice management. And sometimes I invite people on, and I've invited Pure Logic as a company into this conversation because they are one of the very biggest companies in the world that's doing this in dentistry and have some of the most data of anyone. So this is the cleanest information we can get on this topic today. And that is why not only is it Pure Logic, but Josh is the chief officer of revenue for Pure Logic. So I'm trying to get the very highest quality information we can on this specific topic. Josh, I appreciate you joining us. If we could go to the last 2 slides. So first of all, here's one code that my team put in here. If you've enjoyed this webinar and you want to, if you've thought about in the past coming to one of my events, we do these intense 2-day business training events, several different types of events. If you put in this code, it will save you a lot of money. That code alone will probably give you enough savings to pay for your flights, your hotel, and our events. It's weird for me to talk about myself, but I'm confident that no one else has business training events in dentistry that give you as much as we do. So, and you don't have to believe me, just go research it on your own. You'll see it everywhere. So I really encourage you to look into it. If you've thought about it, write this code down, and that will save you a lot of money. And that is us thanking you for being on the webinar and hoping to tempt you to come to an event. That's what my team's trying to do. Also, there's another important thing I want everyone on this call to do. Text the word podcast to that number, 48659. That is going to get you a quick link to subscribe to the Dental CEO podcast. We are probably the fastest growing podcast in dentistry right now. We've been already, after a couple months, listed as the top 100 podcasts on entrepreneurs. So outside of dentistry as well. And we are trying to make this podcast as valuable as possible. Every Monday or so, every week, we release another episode. And it'd be a great habit for you to kind of lock in and listen to that as you work out or drive to work. So text that word to that number and it'll get you subscribed to the podcast. I really encourage you to research it, look at it. We're very proud of it. We think it's just a great addition to dentistry. All right. Well, Josh, do you have any last words here before we end this webinar session?
I personally have been to the Business Mastery Seminar. It is worth every minute of it and every penny.
Awesome. Thank you. Any last words about Peer Logic and about AI? What would someone go, if we can go back to that booking link? I'm going to go back to it on the slide here. So if they go, or there's your LinkedIn, there's your email, someone take a screenshot of that if you need to. They can talk to you about this, about pricing, about software, about timeline, about implementation, all of that stuff. I really do encourage everyone to do that. Anything else we need to say, or shall we end this?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. Well, I appreciate everyone joining. I hope this was a good, hour of your time. Look for our other webinars. I think I'm also doing another webinar tomorrow on raising capital and financing dental practices. So please look at our webinar sessions. We're trying to make these valuable and convenient at night for a reasonable amount of time so that it doesn't bog you down, but it was still worth it. I hope this was worth it for you guys as we see all of these changes happening in AI. Josh, thank you so much for doing this for us and for our listeners and everyone else. Thank you for logging in, and we will go ahead and end this session. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.